class for the last few years. And Abhijit, what they've done is read the first 5 chapters of Poor Economics. And the format we're going to do today is Abhijit's going to give an overview of his work and insights into consumer behavior. And that'll be about half the class. And then I want to use the other half to have a dialogue between product design and development economics. You know, because Abhijit is elucidating a lot of important factors that we can leverage as designers. And we've had this discussion a few times over the last few years, and it's always really exciting because we see the world from 2 very different standpoints, but the overlap region is very powerful in how we can design new products. So with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. So what I'll try to do is kind of translate what the kind of work we do. I'm an economist. What we do a lot is we were part of this organization on campus called JPAL, the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab. And what we do in JPAL are randomized control trials. So large-scale tests of social scientific hypotheses done as randomized control trials, kind of like medical trials. And the data I'll report mostly come from that. So let me start by, but not all of it, and some of the key is, in a sense, the attempt in the chapters you were assigned was to kind of put that together with the broader common sense of economics and what other things we know to tell a story. So I'll continue in that vein. So here's one really interesting, almost, it's one where I feel that it almost hits our definitional sense of how the world should work. It's the idea that the poor don't act as if they're hungry. So the word poor and hungry is almost a cliche, right? You know, you have those 2 words, they go together. And yet, what's kind of striking is how often we hit the fact that when you actually look at the behavior of the poor, they're not acting hungry. That doesn't mean they're not hungry, and I'll come back to that point, but they're not acting hungry. What do I mean by that? Well, that comes to the question of what's a necessity? A necessity is something that, you know, when you have very little money, you buy only that, and as you get richer, you buy less and less of that. That's sort of that's a kind of a natural definition of necessity. So food is a necessity. Is in economics textbooks, you get the example, food is a necessity. I don't know, a luxury car is not a necessity. And it seems plausible. Is it really a necessity? So I'm going to show you some evidence from what are called the ultra poor programs. The ultra poor programs are programs where is a particular class of interventions. These were programs were identified. Well, I can tell you more, but not that important for now. The people who are considered to be the poorest of the poor, the people who are poor in poor neighborhoods. So where you go to a poor neighborhood and ask who's poor here, and the people they point to. They're often a very specific group, which is women with small children whose husbands who either don't have a husband or have a sick husband or have been abandoned by their husband. So this is a very or husband or partner. So it's a very often a very extremely disadvantaged group, because it's even if you have small children and you're very poor and you can't pay for daycare, then you can't even go out to work. So they often live by begging. These programs were all designed to give these people an asset. Give, I don't mean lend them an asset, give them an asset, with the idea that if you give them an asset, they would eventually be able to, and the asset is commensurate with their lifestyle, so it's something that they can kind of work on without having to leave their home too often, or can do something near their house. So if you give them that asset, maybe their lives would become easier and better. And there's lots of evidence that that happens. That in fact, if you look at these people 7 years after they got the asset, and this is done as a randomized control trial, you compare these people with the control group, which are people who didn't get the asset at the same time. 7 years later, they are 50% richer, they are healthier, they are more productive, they're doing everything better. So, but that's not what I wanted to tell you about. What I want to tell you about is just looking at what this does for food consumption. So, this is just what happens. This is monthly per capita consumption in dollars. If you were, this is at 18 months. So just after the program finishes, basically, and you look at these people, their total per capita consumption per month went up by $4, out of which $3.38 were spent on food. And that looks very nice, because it sort of says, it looks like they need food, they're spending it on food. Except that if you looked at the people in the control group, they're spending only about 55% of their total spending on food. So what am I saying? I'm saying that this ratio, if you look at this ratio, that's about 80%. Out of the marginal dollar, extra dollar they're getting because they were in this program, they're spending 80% on food. But the people who are even poorer than them, who didn't get these extra $4, are not spending that much on food. They're not spending 80%, they're spending more like 55%. In other words, the first money people spend is not on food, or is something else. And then this intervention actually makes them spend more as a ratio. This intervention increases their ratio of food spending in their total consumption. So their total spending, the ratio of food spending in the total spending goes up as they get richer and not down.
So they're not spending any less on their other stuff, right? They just use the additional money to buy food, basically?
They're using almost all the additional money to buy food, but what's interesting is that they were not doing that before. So food is, in other words, food doesn't look like a necessity, it looks like a luxury. It's things you buy when you get richer.
And as you go up to higher income, is there a hump?
Of course there's a hump. I mean, we spend roughly 16%
Sure.
of our total consumption on food. So
Do you have a sense of where that hump drop off is?
in this population, yes. I think you start to see that drop off at about $2 a day.
Okay.
So this is just illustrates a general fact that people have found, which is that the poorest people seem to have very low food ratios. That number can be as low as 0.5. We've done this across many countries, looking at the average effect. So that ultra-poor study I mentioned was done in 7 countries simultaneously, but you can look at this data just in the cross-section. You can see, if I compare people, just look at people's budget data, you can see it in many countries, and the number can be as low as 0.5 a day. It seems to be, interestingly, very correlated with what is called the PPP correction. What is the PPP correction? It's the way you adjust domestic prices of goods to be comparable to the US. So countries where non-traded goods, food is a traded good, it's internationally traded, but non-traded goods are cheap. It will be countries where people spend less on food. So people seem to be buying other things. It's not, you can kind of predictably, you can look at countries where there's lots of things to buy, people buy other things. Now, what makes this particularly worrying is that these people are not overfed. They're living on 1400 calories a day. This has been noted. In fact, in India, there's lots of data over time showing that the amount of calories you consume at every income level is going down. So much so that as the country gets richer, people are consuming, even the poor people are consuming less calories all the time. Even though everybody's getting richer, everybody's also consuming less and less food. So the food share is falling, and falling so dramatically that the calories per capita is falling even though people are getting richer. So, why do we see these facts? I mean, how does one explain? So let me propose a hypothesis. One thing that is clear is that one reason why the calorie consumption doesn't go up very fast as people get richer, it's true it goes up but not a lot, is because people quickly substitute toward better tasting foods. Okay, that's inside. So far I just told you about food spending. I didn't tell you anything about the quality of the food. This is within that. So they're spending fairly little on food, but as they get richer, they spend a lot more and more of that on not getting calories but getting taste. So they're moving towards meat, they're moving towards oil, they're moving towards sugar. It's like the completely, a biological model almost. What you're not seeing as they get richer is a move towards what are you might call, sometimes economists call temptation goods, things that are, you may find tempting, but you may not necessarily want to have. If you thought about your life in long-term perspective, you might think, look, this is not what I need calories, my children need calories. So it looks like the poorest people spend a very high proportion of the income on these goods, and as people get richer, it seems to go down. So one of the there's evidence from a number of different sources, including from some randomized controlled trials of microfinance, showing that as people get more access to microfinance, which improves their consumption, generally they seem to be less likely to go for alcohol, tobacco, etc. So in other words, to complete the arc, the reason why people are spending more on food when they get the ultra poor program seems to be that they're moving away from certain types of spending. And what are those spending? They're spending that seem to be things that they are not consistent necessarily with their own long-term goals. So the way we've identified temptation goods, actually they vary across countries. I'm drinking tea. In India, tea is often mentioned as a temptation good. You ask people, what would you like to give up? What do you think you're spending too much money on? And they tell you tea. They're drinking too much tea because it has sugar. It typically has lots of sugar in it, and it's a quick hit of sugar. So they're drinking lots of tea. They tell you that we would rather not drink more tea, and you see that tea consumption in India goes down as people get, when you make them richer by giving them this program. So all of that to say that I think we think about necessities wrong often. we think of them as being a kind of biological process. Body needs calories, we will supply, and indeed there is that. That's a problem. That's a problem because we people are not consuming enough calories, but somehow that's subservient to the more powerful impulse of having pleasure in your life. So even very poor people want diversity, they want pleasure, and they react to, and they want short-term gratification, and all of those forces get sort of particularly kind of the conflation of those forces is particularly damaging for the very, very poor, because the very, very poor are often frustrated, they're often unhappy about their lives, they often therefore need even more the short-term hits. So as people get richer, those even slightly richer, they feel more maybe reconciled to their lives, and therefore they move away from consuming things that are, they don't actually kind of need, even if they want, and towards things that they need. So you do seem to find this strong tension between spending as a way to make your life bearable and spending as something that is responding to biological needs. So I spend money, I would like to make my children healthier, I want to make myself stronger. Those are all biological needs. Those needs seem to be often crowded out when you're extremely poor by other impulses which come also out of being extremely poor, but are more psychological, more a need for some kind of gratification, and not just tomorrow also I'm going to have rice and beans.
So the word escape is interesting there. When you're talking about the poorest of the poor, are they consuming alcohol or tobacco as an escape, or is it just a moment of pleasure?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. That's too deep into the psychology. I haven't yet figured out a way to get there. I just want to show you. These are effects of cash transfers in Kenya, and blue is people who are, so blue is control and R is treatment. So people who are getting cash transfers are red, people who are, and this is their incomes, on the horizontal axis is their income. So obviously even within the very poor population, this is log income varies somewhat. Here is the people, when you get cash transfers, you spend less on cereals, more on meat and fish, that's sort of the pleasure dimension, and less on alcohol, less on tobacco. Your curves shift down. At every income level it shifts down.
Is meat and fish interpreted as both better tasting and healthier for you?
I'm not sure. So I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that question. I assume I think that it's plausible that it's both, but I don't know whether people mostly go to it because they feel that this is pleasure, or because mostly they think it's because it's nutrition. I don't know.
In the slides, you mentioned that people consume 1,400 calories a day for very poor.
Yeah.
Is it
No, not assume. That's the number. 1,400 calories per day is what they consume. It's not a fact. It's a fact.
How are they feeling at that point? Are they like very hungry? And if they are very hungry, why?
So this is a very interesting question. They are not very hungry because your body actually, there's something called homeostasis, and there's lots of disagreement on how much how important it is, but I think there is evidence suggesting that your body adjusts to eating less calories. I don't know, if you ate 8 years or so ago in the US, there was actually a fad of people trying to live on 1200 calories because there was a promise that if you did, you would live longer. So there were people who were trying to do that, and I think you talk to them and they would say that, you know, I feel fine, I got used to it. Well, I'll tell you my personal, I didn't try it, but among my friends, they quickly went back to 2200 calories. The number for the US, if you want to know, to benchmark, is 2600 calories. The average person has 2600 calories. That's 300 calories more than is recommended for them. So the US is on the other side of that curve. But that number is 1400 calories is frighteningly little. They are smaller, so, the poor Indians are very small, so they don't need as many calories, but it's still a very low number. Yeah.
So calorie, I guess, is both this biological thing, but it's also like a commodity to be traded. I guess if you're like labor, you need more calories.
Yeah.
So how does that? So I guess you kind of tip the scales by providing a bit of money to a subpopulation. Is that enough to change like what work they do, or to change their lives in like a significant way?
Yeah, they change. They go into different occupations. They're changing. They're starting. Mostly they just labor hours go up because most of these people are not working. They're begging, living off alms of some kind. So they start working. They work much more when they get some. So you're right that part of that work is probably then eating into these calories. The point is that they seem to be happy to work those extra hours to get the extra calories. It doesn't seem to be that they just. So you could argue, for example, that maybe it's a compulsion. If I have to work, I have to have the calories, but it doesn't seem to be, because they could easily, the assets are saleable, they could sell the assets and go back to having nothing and then not working, but that doesn't seem to be something they're willing to do.
You had said earlier that their actual calorie intake doesn't change very much, or it goes down, right, as their income goes up?
Yeah.
So that's interesting if they're actually working more and maybe burning more calories.
Right, so I think these people are special in that sense. I think that they are probably burning more calories. For the average population, calorie intake doesn't go up very much. It does go up, but it goes up less than, it's not 1 for 1. The elasticity is about 0.3, 0.4. So if you double total consumption, calorie consumption goes up by 30% to 40%. Okay, I'll go to my next example. So insurance is another product that are potentially very important in the lives of poor people. Reason is obvious. Insurance is protection against risk. If you're very poor and you're very little, that's yours, then losing it all seems like very, very dangerous. And you would think that for that reason, poor people would have a very high demand for insurance. This was very much the premise of I think a lot of commercial work on insurance about 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of attempts to introduce new insurance products in the markets for poor, often inspired, for example, by the C.K. Prahlad's work on the bottom of the pyramid, which said that there must be demand for insurance. It was mostly a disastrous failure. Almost all attempts to introduce insurance among the poor as a commercial venture failed. And I want to sort of argue that there's a logic to why they failed. And that So we did an RCT where we worked with a microfinance organization. The microfinance organization was very keen to have its members have health insurance. The reason why they wanted to have health insurance was entirely commercial. They were very keen that their members get treatment when they get sick at a relatively low price, because they realize that when people get desperate, they default on the loans. So when you're a lender, you're very keen that your borrowers are insured. Otherwise, they go to a hospital, they spend all their wealth, and then they are forced to default. So that's a setting they didn't want to be in. They were offering insurance at a very low price. That's 525 rupees. At that time, that was about $10, which is for a whole year for a family of 4 health insurance. Extremely cheap health insurance, significantly subsidized by them. When they did that, so this was done as a randomized controlled trial. Some groups were required to have insurance, others were not. That led to a 21% decline in loan take-up. That's such a massive decline, So you're talking, and how much loans? Loans are roughly about, at the same time, loans were about $200 each. So people were giving up, lots of people were giving up, to pay $10, they were giving up $200 in loans. This was about, at most, an increase in 5% in the interest rate paid on the loan. So when you charge this $10, that was about 5% more in interest. All the other evidence from other RCTs suggests that the interest elasticity of loan demand is nothing like this. This would be an interest elasticity. So this would be like going from 20 to 25% interest. That's a interest rate going up by a quarter, reduces loan demand by 20%. That would be 10 times roughly the rate at which you would have predicted how much it would go down. So this was a massive reaction. Why did it happen? Why do people hate insurance so much? Here's a nice experiment. It's for an insurance product in China for farmers. People in each village were randomized into two sessions, at the session you would be asked to sign up for the loan, for the insurance product. There were intense and basic information sessions. The intense session basically drummed it into you the message that if you are insured and you get a big loss in your crops, you'll be okay. And the basic just gave you information. Why did they take this design? Well, they're interested in the following chain of reasoning. If I give people an intense treatment, more people will take up. So now, since I've broken the village into random groups of people who get invited the first session and the second session, I will see that people who are invited among the people who invite to a second session, some will have friends who went to the first intense session and bought. Others will have wouldn't know anybody who has bought. And the question was, so are people more likely to buy if your friends are buying? So the question of somehow trust in the product was what they were trying to get at. And you find that if one more person in your network takes up the product, then that's equivalent to the effect of a 13% reduction in the price. So it's a massive effect. So the reason why people seem to not trust insurance products is because they don't trust them. Let me explain a little bit more about why do they don't trust them. Well, I think at some level, the problem with most insurance products is that they have, they have lots of these small print. They will say, for example, health insurance product we were looking at had one very important piece of small print, which is that they only pay for inpatient care and wouldn't pay for outpatient care. Inpatient care is surgery and things like that. Now, that per se was pre-stated, and even then, even with that restriction, the product was cheap, but it created a gray area, because if I'm a semi-literate woman who's taking this loan and now has this insurance product, I don't actually understand exactly the boundary of inpatient and outpatient. So, for example, there was one woman who became quite famous because she got really angry. Her husband got cancer and died. She went to claim the insurance, and the insurance said, we can't pay you because you were actually, he got outpatient treatment. They didn't do any surgery. So we can't give you the money. And she thought this was complete fraud, and all her friends immediately resigned. So, but I think most insurance products have this inherent ambiguity, because they say, if, for example, a lot of the agriculture insurance products tell you, we will pay you if rainfall is 10 millimeters less than it's predicted to be, but not otherwise. Now, if you're a poor farmer, you don't know what 10 millimeters are. Yes? And you have no idea who's measuring. You know. Who says 10 millimeters less? Your friend? Sure, he'll say it was not 10 millimeters less. So why would I trust a product where it says something like 10 millimeters less than the norm and will pay you? To do that, I need to understand what a millimeter is, and more importantly, I need to understand that the weather stations measure rainfall, and that measure is reliable and it's not biased in one direction or the other. So in other words, I need to know an entire epistemology of how this knowledge is generated in order to believe the insurance product. So these people in China were reacting to basically the fact that there were people in their community who were kind of leaders, who they trusted to be able to understand these products, were buying these things. And that was really important for them, that they actually couldn't judge the product by themselves, but they could judge it by the fact that certain kinds of people who were inside their networks were buying it. And that's a sort of a marker of a product where trust is important. In general, I would say that, the idea that a product is self-describing is extremely far-fetched. That people interpret them through a set of things they believe. They don't know what a weather station is. Therefore, they don't believe in weather station-based insurance. They don't never heard of it. So you have to sort of think of the information that people are bringing into the transaction, not the information that you think they should have.
So what that means is that in this situation, one of their friends went to the intense training, and so the secondary person trusts their friend.
So not all friends. Actually, they have very nice network data, and they can look at who are the people who are influential.
Okay.
So it's not all friends either. Okay. It's really, that's a kind of a crude way to move the number of friends of yours who will take it up. But in fact, what mattered was certain kinds of friends they trusted to be informed.
Huh.
Yeah.
And they learned about the system of how this insurance works in the intensive session?
I think they did to some extent, but the intense session does increase the take-up. But I suspect that it was not so much that they explained the product. Maybe it was some of that as well, the explaining of the product. Yeah.
Also, similarly, do you think that it would work
if you gave the intensive session to everybody and not just the intensive session to some leaders and smaller ones to other people?
I think it would be different. I think the question was if the leaders took up the product, does that send a separate signal from the just being in the intensive session? I think the answer is yes. I think they look at that actually. Yeah.
Do you know how insurance was adopted historically in the U.S.?
A little bit about it. I mean, it was so. Partly, it's agricultural insurance, for example, came in the early years was mostly provided by. I mean, there was lots and lots of fraud, and there was lots and lots of court cases, and a bunch of states. The state stepped in to be the supplier of insurance. There was a lot of. This was a very fraught area, even in the U.S. There were lots of famous instances of fraud, basically, of different kinds, and so people mistrusted the product. The market was often thin, and then partly the rise of corporate farming obviously made it easier, because then you had equals bargaining on that rather than individual farmers having to figure it out. Okay, here's another product. So this is a product. This is sort of the class of health protection. Health protection is you buying something which makes you less likely to get sick, but it doesn't actually immediately have a health consequence. So it's not buying aspirin when you have a headache. It's buying something that's protective, like better, cleaner water now. Okay. So the one particular theory that was quite prevalent even 10 years ago was the view that you should not give these away, even if they have lots of externalities. Externalities meaning, for example, clean water has externalities because diarrhea is transmitted from child to child. So if I give clean water to one set of children, that benefits all the other children. So, but you should still not give it away, because if you give it away, people waste it. And there were all these nice, I think, one-off examples people gave of how free condoms were used as balloons by kids in some villages in the Philippines. That example I've seen so many times, I suspect it happened only once. However, so that was the. So here's another research project asking, so should we give away insecticide-treated bed nets? Should we give them free? Should we charge for them? Again, the question is very much, if there's obviously a public finance question, which is, can we afford to give them free? But let's assuming we can afford to give them free, is it okay to give them free if it is the case that we think that people will, if they get it for free, they won't value them? And again, there was a nice picture of people using them as fishing nets. That's sort of the level of argument that was being made. And then the question was, how do we get there? So this is another RCT done with Pascaline Jupa, who was a student here for a while, started an NGO in Kenya. She offered subsidized insecticide-treated nets to pregnant women at prenatal visits, and they varied the price. So the price where since she was controlling it, she could offer them at zero price, at 10% of the market price, at half the market price. So the basic prices went from about 10% of the market price to about half the market price or something. So you can see that these are the prices, and this is the number sold. So at 0 or 10, so this is roughly 10% of the price, you still get much demand, but by the time you are anywhere close to a reasonable fraction of the price, the demand has fallen to about 30-something%. So not many people are taking it up. So then the question is, this is one step which says that of course if you give it away, more people take it. That's not surprising. What's striking is that how low this demand is, even at nowhere near the market price. This is much below the market price. It's still very, very low. So that's sort of the worrying part of it. And then you can ask, does usage depend on the price? That's something that you can again look in an experiment, because you have now people who got it at 0, you got it at people who got it at 10, people who got it at 20. You can look at whether those people have different usage rates, and the answer is no. That's usage rates. It's completely flat. So people don't not value it because they, and indeed, as a result, as you raise the price, coverage of children just goes down catastrophically. So this is the fraction of children actually covered by nets, and that goes down as you raise the price. Since the usage is invariant to the price and the demand is variant to the price, you get this relation. Yeah.
Well, did each group receiving the nets get the same education about the health benefits?
Yes.
That didn't change at all.
Had no effect. Indeed, that this curve is actually, so this is saying as you raise the price, you get less children covered, and that number is now it's at 5% or less. By the time you get it to, this is still around half the price of the market price of the good. You already killed the market. This is actually, the news is actually worse than what this picture says, because all the people who are buying here are the rich people who don't need the nets because they don't have any mosquitoes in their houses. So it's actually worse news than.
So they buy the net and they don't use it. Is what that's saying.
Buying the net is uncorrelated with the price at which you buy it is uncorrelated with usage. The rich buy it and use it, but they don't really need it. The poor don't buy it, but they really need it. So if you give it a 0 price, they take it and they use it.
But under that 50 category, does that mean only 5% of the people who bought it at that price are using it?
It means 5% of the people bought it at the price. All of them might be using it. Not all of them. About 70% use it. So 8% bought it and 5% are using it.
In the example that you put in your book about the studies of Easterly, the information that he gives is the opposite of this, right? He's telling that when people pay for the nets, they use it more.
No, when they pay for it, he says exactly that. He says it based on no studies other than, the picture of the net being used as a fishing net. If you actually look at the data, there's no correlation. This is exactly that. Is there a correlation between price and usage? The answer is no. That's essentially, this is usage and this is price. You can see that there's no pattern there. Yeah.
Are the numbers sleeping under the net the same people who bought the net from the NGO, or could they have gotten the net anywhere else?
So they could have got it elsewhere as well. This is just the effect, the average effect. If I offer it to you at a lower price, do I see your child sleeping under the net? What happened in between? You could have traded that net, bought another net. I'm just telling you what happens on average. When I offer it to a lower price, your children is less covered. I offer a higher price, your child is less covered. What happened in between, I'm not. Sorry?
That's because lesser people bought it at the higher price.
Well, it's saying, of course, it's exactly, but the point is that you could have had two theories. This curve could have been very flat if it were the case that people who buy it at low prices don't use it. If only people who buy at a high price value it, this curve could be completely flat, because as there are two countervailing effects. One is that the price going up discourages people from buying, and the second is price going up encourages people to use it, and those could have been countervailing. So this relationship is not mechanically downward sloping. This relationship could be upward sloping. That's what Easterly is claiming. So it is exactly the point. to that point.
The vertical axis is number of people, not percentage of people.
Yes, but that's a big. These are randomized across all these groups, so the number is the percentage. It's just a scale
Even
down.
though you have fewer people in the 50 category than you do in the 0?
Yeah, this is just who were offered. These are all groups which are offered the same number. They were randomized and they're all equal large groups. So 200 mothers were offered this one, 200 mothers were offered this one. I'm making up that number.
Okay.
So the denominator is the same by construction. Okay. So again, what's this saying? This goes back a bit to the insurance, but it's even more. Insurance is a complicated product, but even with these relatively simple products, I think what this is saying is that you're dealing with people who don't have enough faith in the social marketing, that the social marketing campaigns are often very ineffective, that the price is often a better way to social market than social marketing itself. The social marketing is doing very little here. People don't want it. They don't want the product even at a subsidized price. They don't want the product. It's very hard to get people to have faith in products that they don't see immediate results from. People have, this is in contrast to aspirins, for which there's huge demand. People are happy to buy things which have immediate effects. In fact, the problem in the world is overconsumption of antibiotics. Antibiotics have immediate consequences. You take it today, yes, tomorrow the fever is gone, and therefore people are very happy to buy. So what people don't want to buy are preventive health. In general, demand for healthcare is not per se a problem. What's a big problem is demand for preventive healthcare. Here's another example of in healthcare. So in this example, people were actually, it's just a remarkable example, people were offered a free HIV test, which a lot of them took, but then some of them were offered different coupons to pick up the results. So taking an HIV test is useless unless you see the results, okay, as you might have imagined. So most of them don't pick up the results, but if you offer them a small coupon, so what this experiment did was offer them a small coupon, said, look, if you come pick up your results, you can get a small amount of money. And the amount of money was let me remember, less than $2. So you got somewhere between, I'll show you the, this is a very bad, I should have fixed it. So these are in cents, so 10 to 50 cents, this is $2. Okay. Let me just go back and say what. So the intervention is you get money for picking up your results, and the result they found was remarkable, and that's in this picture, which is that if you give me any money, that doubles pickup. Now think of what that's saying. That's saying, why would you not want to pick up your HIV results? Because it could be a death sentence. This is in a period where ARVs were not easily available. You would find out that you are going to die soon, miserably. Okay, so it's perfectly rational not to pick up the results. It's also perfectly rational to pick up the results. You could take some precautions. It could lengthen your life. And it would be better for other people if you behaved. You didn't have unprotected sex with them. That would be good for them. But why would 10 cents change that? This median of this group is 25 cents. Why would you change your entire attitude to something life-changing based on 25 cents? Yeah.
Because then there's a guaranteed good outcome that can potentially counterbalance against a potential disastrous outcome.
So I think you're exactly right that something like that was going on. People don't know how to even think about things like this. So it's, we sort of start with the assumption that we are dealing with people who have demand for things. And I think something like this, which sort of highlights the fact that people don't actually have well-defined demand. They don't actually know what they want. You have multiple impulses. You think it's good if I pick it up, it's what I'm supposed to do. It's bad if I pick it up. If I pick it up, I'm going to get bad news, and that's going to be terrible. So they live within this tension. So in a sense, you offer them the 10 cents, and that defines the problem to them. Now I pick it up, and when you pick it up, you can't avoid the result. The way it was set up is that she would read you the result before she gave it to you. So you had no choice. So you would hear the result, but at that point, given that you can't make up your mind whether it's a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, even a small token payment can have very big effects. So that's sort of a general result from this entire literature on health, is that small token payments have often very big effects. We increased the rate at which children got fully immunized by about, we doubled it by offering their mothers 1 kilo of dried beans every time they got the children immunized. That doubles the rate of immunization. Again, you think that immunization saves your child's life. Why would you react to a kilo of dried beans? But people do. You don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Does it make sense or not? What becomes salient is what is offered to you. Yeah.
Is it also because I'm also thinking from your earlier slides about people buying tobacco or these tasty goods. In general, people's perception of benefit is more short term than long term. So would that have to do with
It could be, but you might think that I think that but the question is why, and I guess I'm saying something more than that. I'm saying on issues on which I seem unresolvable, should I pick up my HIV results or not? The short term might be the rational thing to do. It's look, I can't resolve this. It's too hard. When I can't think of it, then I just give up on all the long term things and I think of the short term. So it may be a natural resolution to that tension.
Just when as the graph was moving towards the right,
Yeah.
The amount of the incentive was increasing, right?
Yeah.
But the percentage of people
Was flat.
Was flat. Is that is the rationale behind that? Because they were trying to cover the transportation expenses to go and pick up the results, or
It could be. It could be exactly that. Remember, it's a proportion. So it's hard to go over 100. So it's a bit mechanical that it's flat. Once you go up to 80%, 40% we're picking up without the incentive. 80. So it's a proportion. So it's a bit mechanical that it's flat.
It was a much lower percentage.
No. Okay. Last example. People often learn from friends and family. Here's an RCT was carried out of deworming drugs in school. Children were given free deworming drugs that increased school attendance, etc. Later, some of the people in the school who were not in this cohort but in later cohorts were offered a free the drug, but not free anymore, for 25 cents. So again, not a large amount of money, but they were. So that first thing it did was it reduced demand. That's the same theme as I was saying. Small token payments. If I give you money, small amounts, that has big effects. If I make you pay a small amount, that also has big effects in the opposite direction. So that's consistent with what I said. What is more striking is when you look at what happens to those whose friends had got the free drugs. And that was also random, since the first set of people who were treated was random. The fact that my friend happened to be someone who got a free drug and therefore took it up was also random. So I have a random set of randomly assigned peers who have information. So I can compare people whose peers had a lot of people who had taken the drug with people who had peers who had not taken the drug. What happened? Yeah.
I would predict that the effect of the small token change becomes smaller because you're not making decisions in the face of opacity anymore. You have more information.
Okay. That's a reasonable guess, except that that's not what happened. The demand went down. People who knew anybody who had taken the pill didn't take it. Why? Because it turns out, and if you looked in the data you would have seen it, but they only looked at the data later. That's why they tried the experiment. People actually thought the pill was, before they took it, they thought it was fabulous. It's going to make sure that they are, never get sick. Of course, people get sick in any case. So when you deal with the people who had real experience, they said, well, it was good, but it was not like fabulous. I still got sick sometimes. So it was bad news for everybody. So sometimes this idea that information will make the market work better is naive. And there's no reason why it would be, but that's what they found. So this is sort of summary of what I just said. They're often very rational. They're making very hard choices often. I don't have to make very hard choices. If I want a chocolate and a bottle of beer, I can buy both. I don't have to make the choice. Both is always an acceptable answer for me. I can afford all of the small temptations I face. So I don't have to be very rational about them. I can just do what I want, and then I can, in fact, not drink the beer, or I can not eat the chocolate and waste it. It's still, it costs $3. I can afford that. But I think the compulsion to live a good life is a very strong one. They want to have a life that's interesting. They don't want to just do the healthy thing. And that makes life often very tense. But in addition, they have very little information, they have very little trust, and lots of skepticism. And if you don't take that into account, you try to give them products which you think make sense under your model of makes sense, you're going to get it wrong. I'll stop.
We are often working on technologies that are meant to benefit people. How do you think we can design in attributes to promote the adoption of the technologies? Let's say it's a water purifier. Like a lot of these.
Water purifier is a classic health good. Very hard to get people to buy it.
Yeah.
I mean, the people who buy it tend to be middle class people.
Sure.
And the people who often need it, who have the worst water, often don't buy it. It's a classic example, actually, of exactly this kind of thing. And I think the thing that's one other lesson we learned from this literature, which I didn't talk about. So with water purifier, there is actually a nice experiment. What they do is they tried various things to get people to buy chlorine to put in the water. And you can get people to buy chlorine by cutting the price, but even if you cut the price, people often buy chlorine but don't put it in the water. Okay? It doesn't depend very much on the price, as I was saying. It's not the case that if I cut the price, people buy it more and they don't use it. There's no particular correlation between it, but people don't use it. The reason why they don't use it is that it's a pain. You buy chlorine, you put a few drops in the water, then you cover it and leave it for 12 hours. And or I don't know, several hours. So you have to remember that, you have to do it at the right time. So two lessons from that. One is that don't make a product which requires people to plan. Automatic is very good. I'll tell you one thing. When I arrived in the US, I had very left-wing politics when I arrived. And this was Reagan's US. I hated everything. The thing I loved in the US when I first arrived was that you could drink cold water out of water fountains everywhere. This was the first thing I remember writing to my then girlfriend, saying, "This is, it's a great country. You can drink water everywhere. It's clean." But I think if you come from a setting where you always worry whether the water is drinkable or not, it becomes, the automaticity of it is extremely important. So first thing is making people pre-plan. So marketing in a way that you can go here, fill up your bottle, bring it home and give it to your daughter, doesn't work. It has to be, when I think of it, I must have access to it. Water is not the kind of thing which I can pre-plan. That's, I think, one thing that I think people find it very difficult to pre-plan these things. They forget. They'll, when the need comes, they'll remember they need the water. At that point, if your purifier has to warm up for 15 minutes and then you have to put in the water and you have to wait for 25 minutes more before the water comes out, it's useless. It needs to work then, because water is a very immediate need. When you're thirsty and you don't want to wait. And if your 4-year-old is thirsty, that's even more so. So I think that's one very clear thing from this, is that people, the logic of it might be impeccable, that this is a wonderful product, etc. But people don't necessarily believe that it's as valuable as you think it is, partly because they have drunk clean water and still got sick. They don't put into it, it's very hard to filter out the information. So the reason why you believe in clean water is not based on your personal experimentation. Most of us have not experimented with unclean water. We haven't done a personal randomized control trial. One day I drink unclean water and see if I throw up or not. So it's not how we learnt about it. We learnt it from some general principle that we learnt in school, that the germs in the water, if you kill the germs, then we don't get sick. They don't know that. So then they are expected to learn that from their experience, but their experience is that I bought clean water but I still got sick. Now that's perfectly plausible. You often get sick even if you buy clean water, because there are 50 other ways. You bought clean water just fine, but then you ate something from a vendor who had used dirty water in it, and therefore you got sick. So separating out all the reasons why you should drink from a small sample of your personal experience is very difficult. So that's one reason why learning is hard, because there are lots of random things happening in your life, and some of those are good shocks, some of the bad shocks, and in the middle of that you're trying to manipulate it, and it's very hard to learn whether your manipulation is working or not. That's a general principle. Don't assume that people can learn what you've learned mostly from a textbook by personal experience. Personal experience is not a very good substitute for a textbook. Textbooks summarize information from a very different set of sources. So that's first. I think that we often it's tempting to overvalue the wisdom of the people, but it's very hard to actually learn what's good for you. So I think assuming that people will know that it's valuable is not particularly, I think you'll often get it wrong if you assume that people know. The insecticide treated bed nets, the ones who needed it most, didn't want to pay a lot of money for it. I think not because they're stupid, but because they don't actually understand their child still gets sick sometimes, even if you put them under the bed net. Though on average, malaria deaths have gone down catastrophically in the last 10 years since free bed nets were adopted. Malaria has suddenly become much, much less bad by an order of magnitude almost. So, but that's a statistical result. It's something we can see in the aggregate. In my personal experience, I saw my child get sick 3 weeks after I bought the net and put her under it. I don't realize it's not malaria that she got. She had some other fever, which she could got, she got dengue, and dengue happens during the day, and malaria mosquito bites you in the night. But I don't know the difference. She got sick, I had to take her to the hospital, it was expensive, and now I lose faith in this. So I think the idea that people will, from general principle, believe in it. So I think people don't believe in many of these things is because they are hard to learn about. So that's sort of point number one, and perhaps, and then if you make it hard for them to use it, that's all the more so.
So, bed nets is also an interesting example where you got the highest number of people adopting when you gave it away for free, right? But that's a hard business model to scale.
It's not a business model.
Yeah, it's a terrible business model. It's an out of business model, right? So, what's your take on some of these development interventions? Do you think that sometimes we just have to accept we have to do a charitable model?
No, it's not that the question is not whether, so the question in these studies is not whether or not they should be given, it's not that, the question is who pays for it.
Yeah.
So should I get the beneficiary to pay, or is the government or some other funder a better buyer? And for many of the things, I think this evidence points to the fact that it's better to have single buyers who then fund it through the tax system, rather than the idea that every decision is a private decision and we should make it individually is what's at issue. Not who pays for it. I think somebody should, Kenya has enough tax dollars to buy these bed nets.
Okay. But there's maybe more expensive interventions that you could not afford to buy for every family.
But most families couldn't afford them either. It's not clear to me that there are that many interventions that are very valuable, which families could afford to buy. There are things like that. So there's now lots of interesting work on sort of solar generators trying to create revenue models that are sustainable.
Yeah.
And mostly they haven't quite got there. Is my reading of it, is that you have to get people to pay for them on a long-term amortization basis. Pay helps, but doesn't quite get you the demand you want.
Well, I'm thinking of things like sanitation infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if Kenya could afford that, because that's a very expensive undertaking, like nationwide.
But that's almost never privately funded. It's always tax dollars. Think of Cambridge.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Cambridge doesn't, if it wants to, if you add a house, it doesn't charge you for the underlying piping of the house.
I understand, but people in Cambridge are paying their taxes.
Yeah, so I think there's a question of whether or not